Everyone knows that when you stood in front of the Rebbe, you stood with the greatest derech eretz, with the greatest yiras hakovod, the greatest awe. And this was not only when you stood by Yechidus all alone, or when you went over by dollars, but even when it was in public, in front of others, like by Fabrengen. But more it was felt in the Yuzen and the Chofs when the Rebbe would daven mincha ma'ariv with the Bochur's minyan. And there were not so many Bochurim there. You had some younger light also come to the davening, but it was basically a smaller crowd. And the Rebbe came into mincha ma'ariv, and the Rebbe stood in his corner. Everybody moved away. And the feeling you got that you had to stand there in such a special way, you couldn't do anything, you wouldn't do anything in front of the Rebbe. Now, there was a problem sometimes that there was nobody to go over to the Amid. That sometimes there was no chiyuv who had to daven for the Amid, and there is no younger man who came in, and this was a Bochur's minyan, so it's very likely that there's no one to come to the Amid. Nevertheless, they always would find somebody to go over to the Amid. But it did happen sometimes that no one went over to the Amid, and the Rebbe came in. I remember quite a few times it happened. The Rebbe came in like 3:15, he came in to Mincha, or 9:30 to Ma'ariv, holding his gartel, came into his place, and there's nobody by the Amid. So what would happen? So any bocher who was not far from the Amid would just run over. It's not nice that the Rebbe should stand and wait and nobody's by the Amid. So we'd run over to go to the Amid. But the feeling the bocher had, davening as a Shliach Tzibur, in front of the Rebbe, especially when there's a smaller crowd, and every little thing that happens is seen, and every person counts. So the feeling you got was a very nervous feeling. But there was no choice. Whoever was standing close would do that. I remember it's quite a few times it happened that I was standing close, and the Rebbe walked in, and there's nobody by the Amid, so I ran over to the Amid, and I davened for the Amid. But the daven was so nervous, standing in front of the Rebbe and davening had to make sure that you daven in Sfiris when the Rebbe fears. So he said, you're completely nervous. And afterwards, for hours afterwards, they wouldn't come back to yourself. You were nervous, you couldn't do anything, because the feeling that you had to daven for the Amid in front of the Rebbe was some special feeling. It's a feeling that we can't even describe, but this is how it was, that the feeling was so specially, so nervous, but they had no choice because the Rebbe is standing there and you can't not go over. And the Rebbe should just stand and wait even an extra second. Actually, I even heard from some people who came, like Orchim, they said that one of the things that impressed them is that there's no such thing as having the Rebbe wait an extra second. And they themselves saw that it happened a few times during Tishrei, that there was nobody that by the Amid, and the Rebbe walked in a second, somebody walked over to the Amid and started right away, or Borachim or Ashrei, whatever it is. But this was a feeling that you had, that you davened for the Amid in front of the Rebbe, that was a very, very special feeling.